Hello and welcome to another episode of The New Frontier. I am here back with Joe. We haven't seen you in ages, Joe. We've both been traveling across all various places, but
Yeah.
in that time, you've become a massive influencer.
Oh man,
Social media
I
sensation.
really wish you didn't put it that way. No, I had one post that went a little bit prominent, I would say. I ain't an influencer. I do not acknowledge this. I do not see myself like that, so please do not.
Okay. Well, I mean, I roughly feel like you are on about 15,000 followers. You've like doubled your following on LinkedIn, roughly. I mean, not that I'm checking your page every day, but
It's
is that roughly correct?
that is roughly correct. Yes,
That's crazy.
yeah. So no, it was really crazy. At one point, I actually felt like total anxiety going on LinkedIn because I literally had like the entire time like a non-stop stream of DMs. Like at every given minute, I would click on the connections box and it would have like a 99 plus connections, and then I
Nice.
will close it, and then it will go again on 99 plus in like 2 minutes. And I was like, so at the moment I have like literally 9,000
Mhm.
connection invites, and my LinkedIn actually crashes whenever I try to like go
I
through it.
can't add you to these events anymore. I don't know. I don't know if because you're now so famous that like the lowly, 10,000 follower people can't. I literally can't add you to, or I can't tag you. It's really weird. Like I don't know if you've kind of upped in terms of your
I have
status.
no idea, but actually, what's hilarious is that LinkedIn forced me to change my name to Joanna from Joe. And they said like I cannot be a Joe, I have to be a Joanna. So I was really
Why?
pissed off about that.
That's very
Hmm?
strange. That's very
Yeah.
strange.
Anyway, I hear you. I mean, I've seen your LinkedIn and you're jetting around on lots of events and speaking. So what is coming on your events agenda?
Yeah, it's been that season, and I'm keen to hear about Billion Dollar Seller Summit. But yeah, I will be in Warsaw on the 23rd and 24th and 25th on the Global Sellers Conference, and then
Cool.
I will be at Sofia for Amazing Days on the 28th and the Auckland E-commerce Summit. So we're doing a lot of these events, and yeah, the links will be. I'll put them below. So please come if you're in those, if you're in and around those areas, come and say hello. Be very very excited to see you there. But how was Billion Dollar Seller Summit?
Oh my God, it was amazing. Like, honestly, I mean, it's no surprise. This is my third billion-dollar seller summit. And I just have to say, it was really like kudos to Kevin King and the entire crew that organized the event. It was in Iceland over 5 days. I think it was also the longest conference I've been on, but it was so worth it. And what was cool is that I submitted a strategy, which I presented, and my strategy
Mm.
was selected from 22 others. And on stage presented 10 other amazing presenters, and I won. I am so proud. I'm so proud and so chuffed and like almost hysterical about it. Like it's such an honor. So I'm just going to bathe in my glee for at least another 3 days. But it's okay. People will.
Well, congratulations. What was the hack?
It was a strategy around creating AI product images, videos, and AI influencers showing a like holding a product. So
Mm.
it was kind of like the entire flow of AI generated product content for a product and a brand.
Well, we will be going into a lot of details on that next week with Sim, but this week we are very excited to be joined by a strategic marketing leader specializing in brand storytelling, content strategy, and audience engagement. With over a decade in B2B, B2C, and e commerce, she has helped brands to find their voice, craft compelling messaging, and execute high impact campaigns. Most recently, she was the director of marketing at Carbon 6, which was acquired by SPS Commerce in 2005, which obviously was a few months ago, for 210 million. So, welcome, Shannon.
Whoop, whoop.
Woo woo. Sounds so impressive when you say it like that. Thank you.
Wow, you did. Yeah, I mean,
I need more
No,
people to follow me
yes.
around and read out my resume. It's
read
a
out
real
your bio
confidence
like that.
booster. Yeah.
I'm not going to lie. When you sent me the topic for this podcast, I was even more excited than I normally am for the art episodes because I think it's fascinating. And you sent the topic of building effective teams in an AI workforce, which is just such a topical thing and like such a deep discussion, which I'm really excited to get into. So I think I'll start by I don't know if you saw the post by Toby Luke, who is the CEO of Shopify, but he put out something very similar to what you kind of said to discuss actually before you even posted about it. So I don't know if you're ahead of the
No.
curve,
Tell me about it. Give me the
but
summary.
he wrote an internal memo which was then leaked, and the internal memo started. We are entering a time where more merchants and entrepreneurs could be created than any other in history. We often talk about bringing down the complexity curve to allow more people to choose it as a career. Each step along the entrepreneurial path is rife with decisions requiring skill, judgment, and knowledge. Having AI alongside the journey, increasingly not just doing the consultation, but also doing the work for our merchants is a mind blowing step function change. He then goes on. The piece I want to read, which is right at the end of the kind of internal memo, which is kind of the action plan, was before asking more for headcount and resources, teams must demonstrate why they cannot get what they want done using AI. What would this area look like if an autonomous AI agent were already part of the team? This question can lead to really fun discussions and projects. So that's the CEO of Shopify basically not enabling teams to hire anyone unless they've already kind of evaluated AI first. So I want to turn it to you. What are your thoughts and reflections on that first of all?
I kind of hate that. I think that there's a lot of fear around using AI. I think that's something like, especially, I come from a marketing background, a content background, a creative background. And so there's a lot of threat in that space, I think. And so the reason I say I kind of hate that is because I hate leading with prove why a robot can't do it. I think it should be prove why a human can do it better. So it's just a matter of perspective in that way. Generally speaking, I think it is true that you have to integrate AI, right? Like we can't just be sitting back and not using it. But I think that perspective of tell me why a robot can't do it kind of cheapens the whole human experience.
Yeah, and I mean this is a really interesting point because I think there is a lot of narrative now, which is get rid of the humans, just do it with AI. But the reality is that at least at the current moment, thankfully, we're not at this stage. But when it comes to AI can be an amazing tool, it can be amazing help, it can like speed processes, it can make them better. But like when it comes to integrating that into an organization and a team, how do you think about that like process? Like what is the place and the role that AI has to play and how can companies integrate that effectively?
Yeah, I think, AI should be integrated into teams like any new hire on a team should be. It has its strengths, but it also has its limitations. I've in the past taken to referring to it as your intern, especially working with people who are a little bit afraid of it, because then you kind of have that power dynamic play where like, let's just your intern, let AI do the work that you don't want it to do. Let it take your coffee order. It's fine. But I think like AI isn't gonna be able to do everything. It should be, to get the best results, organizations should define the role clearly. Where does AI add value? Kind of going back to that article and the quote you read, like, where do we need to have human intervention in order to be successful? AI isn't going to hold itself responsible for upholding your company vision and values, for example, right? Like, it's really important to your core brand to have mission and vision and values and something that you're striving for and principles that you're upholding. AI isn't necessarily going to be held accountable for that. So I think when you're talking about integrating it, you still need to require that human oversight and require that final review in the same way that you would need to do that if you hired someone new for your team who isn't read in on the company guidelines yet, who doesn't necessarily understand the brand DNA that you're working with. It just requires a little bit more. So treating it like another member of the team versus a replacement for any human on the team, I think is an important first step.
I want to come back to that piece because that's a really interesting debate. But I want to firstly kind of, for the sake of the podcast, put the argument in favor of what Toby said, which honestly I agree with. And the reason I agree with is I've seen organizations, as you guys know, I worked in Amazon for 6 years, and there is this push in organizations that happened. I worked in maybe 4 or 5 different kind of departments or units, each with separate under separate directors and separate VPs. I was out in Singapore. I worked in B2B. I worked in search. I worked in grocery. So I worked in like complete different departments. But one consistent thing I saw was that the the behavior of people in these departments was always to push for more humans in their team because they knew that you get more humans is a way to get yourself a promotion. And basically, what people do is every year, and I was guilty of this, but everyone across the business was guilty of this. You would say, "Oh, I need someone to do this. I need someone to do that," and I basically, I'm trying to grow my organization structure because at some point, at least in the Amazon space, like when you're managing, like you've got 6 direct reports, and each of those direct reports have got direct reports. You're kind of qualifying yourself for that, the next level of promotion, or even at a lower stage, right? You hire someone beneath you, you're probably going to get that jump from like a grad role to the level above that. So I think it's a very good forcing function to help people to think about solving the problem that the customer that the customer faces, rather than politically maneuvering in the company to just grow headcount because actually everyone's motivated by a promotion, and at the end of the day, what lots of people are, and therefore it kind of it removes that as a reflex that people have. I don't know what your thoughts are.
I think that that's a useful framework to think through too, though, that AI can be the stepping stone for you. Like if the idea is, okay, if we hire more people, then that gives me more opportunity to move up, then
Mm-hmm.
AI should allow you to accomplish that same thing. I
Yeah.
think my initial reaction to the quote is, don't immediately take the human element out of it by challenging someone to beat a robot. Like that's what I don't like about it, because I think, it is a sensitive topic. And again, that's coming from my background with a highly personal, intimate career path of people who are creatives, who are putting their heart and soul and vulnerability into everything that they do. So there is much more of a, easing them into an element, which is why my reaction is that way, because I know how often, and really what I've experienced in trying to get teams, creative teams in particular, to be more receptive to using AI is they're already looking for all the reasons why it won't work. And I'm not interested in the reasons why it won't work. I'm interested in them telling me why it will work. And so I think to that conversation, like if you want to move up, if you want to advance in your career path, then tell me all the ways that you're going to make AI work for you, and then what you're going to do differently on top of that.
Nice. I mean, it makes total sense. I'm really interested to hear how did you approach it from your own sort of like personal career path? You were managing a team at Carbon 6. I have seen you in action. Like I basically met Shannon at several events, and I always like this was the first thing that I really spotted is how on point all of the branding was for Carbon 6. There was always like something to like start a conversation in terms of whether it's the outfits or the little tab that you guys brought, or like everything was so well thought through. And I'm curious to understand, how did you integrate AI within your team and within your processes?
Yeah, I think I use AI constantly, and I think that actually is a really important element of leadership with AI too, is using it yourself. It's not helpful, and I'm sure we've all had our various experiences of this, of leadership and executives saying use it, but then they don't use it themselves. So for me, part of being a leader on my team was not just saying, "Hey, you guys got to do this," but actually showing how I'm using it. Um, a lot of early stage AI that I was using was really, I would record myself with my like stream of consciousness and then ask AI to turn my stream of consciousness into actual notes and actual takeaways. Voice memos to AI were really my bread and butter for a long time. But I think as someone who is, creative at my core and creative at my heart, it's using AI to refine, to come up with, hey, here are all my crazy ideas that are all over the place. Now digest that for me, narrow it down. But it's also the back and forth. It's okay, use it and narrow it down, but let me put more input back into it now, and back and forth. And I think that's sometimes where the thread is lost, is like, you can't just take the initial product and call it done. I actually was in the process a few months ago of interviewing for a role at my last company, and someone that I interviewed, I could tell that they had done their assessment using AI. And it wasn't hard to tell because it was not refined at all. And the funny thing is, like, you want them to use AI, right? Like, part of the conversation around hiring teams in an AI workforce is hire teams that are receptive to using it. So I wasn't upset that they used it. I was upset that I knew that they used it. And in the interview, I said, how do you feel about AI? And they kind of coyly were like, well, I actually used it to do my assessment. And I said, I know. It's like, I know, and like, so I think for me, like, the way that I've tried to integrate it into my workflow is absolutely, it's a necessity, but it is by no means the final product ever. And reminding people that that review over and over again is what makes all of the processes still human, is that we can't just have it be final on the first go.
Mhm. One of the ways that I use, of course, use it in many ways, but one of the most recent ways I found very helpful was I was writing my investor update a few days ago, put it into Claude, and just going back and forward as a kind of thought partner on restructuring and clarifying and maybe moving bits. It's so helpful just to kind of get like 16 drafts of something, and then you can read, as you say, and you can pick the best one. Um, I guess how did you encourage your team to do it? And bringing it back to what you said a bit about the mission, vision, and values, were you making kind of like Claude projects that sounded like Carbon Six language, and kind of because or kind of like customizing a bit to make it closer to the finished article? Even obviously, it's not going to get 100% of the way there, but 80-90% of the way there.
Yeah, like creating custom GPTs, for example, with our brand guides and one thing that was great actually is we finally hired a product marketing manager. So we actually had product documentation, and that helped as well. But yeah, kind of creating those libraries and creating that system to reflect back. But at the same time, using that and seeing what the first product was or the first output was, and then showing the team like, hey, like, this is, again, it was, for me, a lot of it is rebuilding the confidence in your team that they can't be replaced. So my experience with that was like, see, guys, look, like, it's not perfect. It's going to get you draft one, which is great because nobody has time to write draft one, but I still need you to edit. And I think being reminded, like, I still need you to edit. I also am not a graphic designer at all, but would use whatever AIs to create initial versions of designs when I needed to do something. And like, that made my designers feel real good because, again, I'm not a graphic.
I think we lost Shannon for a second.
Just lost you for a second there.
Now we see you.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I think it's always striking the balance of what works and what doesn't work and keeping both in mind. But again, that's what brings it back to being a collaborative tool, because you don't expect everyone on your team to be able to do every single thing. And when you talk about like design thinking and collaboration and radical collaboration, it requires a lot of different viewpoints, and the idiosyncratic technical expertise, but also the human expertise are what makes for best problem solving. So that's why I always try to frame whatever AI you're using as just another contributor on the team.
And maybe this is a bit of an extension to this question, but like, how did you make your team kind of be more receptive and more proactive in their use? I mean, it's one, like, of course, one super powerful tool is to show them that you're using them, but like, was there like any processes you created or any sort of like, I don't know, team competitions or anything like that that was more of a, I guess, a structured way to get everyone to like dip their toes in?
Yeah. So if you tell people it's okay for them to block off their calendar to do something other than work, they'll be a lot more receptive to it. So
I think we lost Shannon. This is actually like one of the most mortifying things, don't you agree? Like, you're on a podcast and then your internet stops. Like, it happened to me twice. And I was like, oh my God. And then you just go into like this crazy stress mode of
Yeah.
fuck, fuck, fuck. And you just can't do anything about it.
I remember when I did my first, well, I did AM/PM with Kevin King, and it was a very big deal for me at the time. And I
Yeah.
was doing it in a hotel room, and yeah, like the internet
No.
log in, and I was like trying to like I was stressing out so much, and he was sending me all these emails, and he was like, "Are you there? Can you log in?" I was like, "Oh my god!" But yeah, I had to move it, and I was like, "Oh, maybe he's not going to want me on again," and but it's fine in the end.
It's okay. I think this is so human. Like, I was on a pod with Isabella Riz at one point, and it wasn't the internet, but it was really terribly loud where I was, and there was nowhere else to go. Like, I don't know, like, I had booked this room in a co working space, but then because it was quite late, people were, I don't know, just having a party. And Isabella, I think, was like, is there a quieter room? Is there like, can you switch on like a microphone? I was like, yes, no, I can't. Hello.
Unbelievable. It's crazy. This
Don't
actually
worry.
only ever happens when I have a podcast, and it's crazy because I used to have my own podcast and it never happened. So it's
Look,
only when I'm a guest.
we were just discussing exactly the same thing that happened to us. Like when, for example, technology just gives up exactly when you're on a podcast. So no stress at all.
Yeah, I think maybe technology heard me insulting him, was like, listen, cut her off.
But
Um,
you were to the we heard the part where you said like you essentially enable people to block off time from their calendars, not to do work but to focus on something else.
Yeah, and then we would do, I added like a weekly in our all hands meeting, an option to do an AI spotlight. So that if there was something that you were excited about that you wanted to share, and there was no pressure, it was optional. But if there was something that you would come across, there was no like structure to it. It was just, hey, we got 5 minutes in team meeting. Did anyone use AI for something interesting today?
Mm-hmm.
And
Nice.
this is an interesting thing because, and I'll open this question up to Joe afterwards because I know she kind of does this for a living. But how do you think about retraining and upskilling people? Because this technology is absolutely coming. And my dad, who is a consultant, told me that like when he was starting in his consultancy job like years and years ago, he basically was like getting people to use Excel for P&Ls, and he was going around to all these businesses and he was like, "Oh, this Excel tool is going to help you track your P&L way better and manage your books as a company." Because obviously, at one stage, no one was using this, and it's so obvious that like now imagine trying to build a forecast and not using Excel. Like what does it even look like? It's kind of unimaginable. So how do you think about that process of like training and reskilling people for something which, in my opinion and maybe your opinion, is so obviously going to become such a fundamental part of the work that they do?
I'm going to take a slight step back from that question because I think in the conversation of hiring teams too, you need to hire people that are open to it. And there is a need to be open and receptive to using AI first. So in that hiring process, there's a lot of, historically we've looked at a lot of role-based recruitment of like, they need to have this degree, they need to have this title in their past, they need to have gone to this type of university, whatever. I think now that shift needs to go more towards skill-based recruitment of, have they shown that they are avid problem solvers? Have they shown that they are active? Is it on their resume that they're using AI currently? Things like that. So I think the first step, if you want anyone to learn something new, is that they need to be open to learning that thing. And then I think, like with teaching anything, you need to understand that people learn differently. So some people are going to learn just fine if you tell them to go off on their own for an hour and go, test out a new automation. Some people are going to learn better if you give them 20 minutes to learn from someone in that all hands lesson. So I think you have to kind of go back to the basics of how do people learn in order to make sure that they're learning effectively, because sometimes it's not their fault that they're not learning it either. Different people learn different ways.
Anything to add, Joe, in your experience
No,
consulting?
I completely agree. I think it's also about showing people that, especially if you invest in like upskilling them with AI, that's the whole point. You're not trying to get rid of them by implementing AI. I think a lot of resistance is because either people have tried AI and it didn't work because they don't know how to use it, or that they fear that they're going to be replaced if they just say yes to it, which in either case is not, like in most cases, is not the case. So like I think it's a lot about um, when you are planning to implement a training program like that, is about actually having very transparent conversations with your team, and like almost having like a very like psychologically targeted messaging around the whole thing, like reassuring them so that they can be open, and rather than just taking the stance of this doesn't work, this is rubbish, this is going to replace me, as like this is a huge opportunity, I'm going to be so much more efficient in my job, and I am going to make my job so much easier by knowing how to use AI. But I think this is there's a like mismatch between the organization saying like we need to use AI for everything, and people being like I'm scared of this. And so there needs to be more like open conversations and more support, I would say.
Yeah, I agree
I
with
think
that.
from my perspective, I don't think organizations are leveraging this nearly. I think with and I'd love to hear, Shannon, your view, obviously, um, from your recent experience, but from what I see, kind of now as an outside on the startup, in a startup, organizations are not at all leveraging AI to kind of any state, and they're kind of frilling around the edges, in my opinion, and they're very very few are kind of going all in, and it's these kind of big proclamations from like Shopify CEO where he's kind of like forcing people to do stuff. Because I agree, people don't naturally want to do it. But I mean, what's your view? Is it like what percentage of tasks do you feel were being automated versus kind of hadn't really changed for like the last 5 years before kind of this generative AI wave?
I think I've seen a lot more of individual team leaders deciding to roll it out rather than it being an organization wide objective. And so without that, you don't have necessarily the right resourcing behind it. For me, because I was a scrappy marketing leader leading a way too small team, it was out of necessity. It was, we're not hiring. We don't know when we're going to be hiring. So let's figure out ways that we can integrate this into our process. And even as we became a better resource team, that didn't go away because it was still important. So I mean, one of the things that I used AI for constantly was writing blogs. It would help me create the outline, sometimes write the full blog and then go back and do all the editing. And then there were things that I would add to those blogs that were, manually added by me, whether it was video links or backlinks or whatever. And then what we started doing was adding an audio feature to those so that they would read out. And that was all done through using AI rather than having one of us have to record our voices every single time. And that was actually one of the things that I think started changing people's views on it, because we use AI to do a voice clone someone on our team so that it sounded like it was someone on our team. And that was a perfect use case because they're like, well, I don't want to have to do this every single time we write an article. And it's like, well, exactly. And so that was a really good example of see how it's like taking something off your plate that you weren't even thinking about doing in the first place, but it's made our content better with almost
Yeah.
no effort and very little need to do much more other than put the transcript through the platform once a week.
Really interesting. And actually, I want to flip the question, which is, what did you not use AI for? Like, what were the sort of areas where you were like, actually, this needs to be just human kind of expertise versus AI?
Yeah. I think that the secret is that you can use AI for anything. What you're not going to use it for is the various stages of refinement. So you can use AI as a starting point for any project, and we did. But the degree to which you then have intervention and you have more stakeholder review and you have more and more levels of editing, it just depends on the significance of the project. What I wouldn't use it for was like, at Carbon 6, we have Comic 6, which is just our kind of campy, fun comic series that we came up with because I wanted to, because I'm a nerd. And I wouldn't use ChatGPT for that because I think it's funny. Like I like doing it. And because also it requires whether people who view them find them funny or not, I do. But it
I
requires an
find it funny.
understanding. I think
They
they're
were,
funny, but it
I think they're
requires an
really good.
understanding of our industry to get the
Yeah.
joke, right? And it's like, I don't think AI necessarily is going to give the punchline. I think the punchline is up to us. And so anything that's like very personal like that, you know, like press release too, it's like you don't want your executive quote being written
Mhm.
by AI. You know, that's so things like that are inherently personal, which are kind of obvious. It's kind of the obvious answer, but anything that's inherently personal or inherently requires a more human point of view, have a human do it.
Yeah.
So, kind of maybe shifting on from talking about like AI tools, did you guys have any AI agent solutions at Carbon Stakes? Uh, so kind of actually having an AI within the workforce, so not just like one of your team members using Midjourney or whatever, but actually kind of within your team you have some folks, some human folks, and some like agents. Did you get to that stage?
No, I think the closest we were getting to that was with editorial because we were
Mhm.
using it so constantly for blog creation, but nothing was ever running on its own to like the full extent that an agent would.
Hmm. I mean, where actually I'm interested to understand how do you see agents are going to impact, for example, our industry, brand marketing, like all of that.
It's a great question. And I have different feelings on it depending on which hat I decide to wear at any given moment. As a marketing director and marketing leader, I see it as being really positive. I think to go back again to the original quote that you shared, Max, it is an opportunity to resource a team without having to hire. And so I think that that's huge. And I think it's going to allow for a lot of opportunity to scale faster, but also experiment faster and fail faster, which, is kind of the cliche, but it's like you want to fail quickly and you want to fail often. And I think hiring agents to do that helps a lot. Hiring,
Mhm.
heavy air quote. On the other side of things, though, again, when I look at my experience with creative and with content, I think it has the possibility to be really morally damaging to existing teams to
Mhm.
feel like their work can be replaced by something. Even myself, I have always done freelance for my whole career because I am a workaholic, cool brag. But I was working on something a couple of weeks ago and I could tell they had sent me the brief for it and there was a whole reference document. And in the reference document, there were pages upon pages of things that I could tell were AI. And I was like, damn, they didn't give me this project. Like this is a project that in the past they would have given me to do. And I can tell that they didn't. And they went with AI instead. And that's a legitimate, that is a lived experience and a real concern is job security around AI. And of course, there's like that argument of like, well, if AI can do it, then like, shouldn't you just be better at your job? Like AI shouldn't be able to do what you can do. But that sometimes isn't your call. Like in that instance, that wasn't my call. I would have rather been the one working on that project. I would have rather been the one creating the responses and giving them what they wanted. But they decided for whatever reason that wasn't. They just wanted to use AI for that one, and it wasn't bad, right? I mean, and that's the thing is, it wasn't bad work, but it wasn't good work either. Someone who has done brand and content for as long as I have can look at it and say it's not exactly the brand voice. It's a little bit off. I wouldn't have used that word. That word doesn't fit with that brand.
Mhm.
So,
So
so
yeah,
how?
I think it can help with resourcing, but I also think you really have to be whenever you hire a new person for a team, you have to think about how they're going to fit within that team.
Mhm.
There's really no exception when it comes to adding an AI agent.
I'm interested how you think about that kind of motivation and morale, because for example, our team on the agenda question, all our software engineers are using Cursor. It's a fantastic tool. Means that a lot of this code, you know, like you can AI generate code, but B, you can then test stuff. And, like what I think coders hate doing in the past was sitting there and like actually stress testing the stuff they've just written, right? They don't want to do that. They want to go and build the next thing. No one likes, rereading your essay for spelling mistakes like you used to have to do at school or whatever. That's the worst bit. So now you can
Like
have
you
an AI.
used to have to do.
Well, like that's what they say you have to do at school. You sit there and reread it for 5 minutes. It's really dull. But with something like Cursor, you basically have an agent. It's going to stress test it. It's going to stress test it better than any human can do because A, they don't really want to do that, and B, it's going to have all of the data in its training to like hit it with 16,000 different angles. So at the end of the day, it makes the human better at their job, means they can go a lot faster and they can remove the boring bits. I mean, so like, how do and I would say my team, again, we've always been using it like AI stuff with AI forward. I mean, that's just, as a kind of AI first company, that's what we are. But like, how do you kind of deal with that demoralizing? Because I don't feel like if you're using it in a, in a way that means that you're passing on a lot of work, surely that's not demoralizing for people, right? If they're generating 10,000 blogs and they're you're sitting there just coming up with the idea, and it's basically how we do the blog content. I will think of an interesting idea and Claude will write the blog. And like that's a really great way of doing it. And I have really, in my humble opinion, interesting blogs about Alexa and ranking on Alexa Plus and how many people are using Rufus and all these like interesting questions that just come to me when I'm working out or whatever. And then I have a beautiful blog there because I've got a project set up with my writing style. And so I don't like how are you thinking about that motivation and changing perceptions maybe?
Yeah, I think again it comes back to that idea of it being a collaborator. I think like there's dynamic, I think, with the conversation around AI where sometimes people feel like AI is like getting treated better. And that's not really the case. Like AI is just another tool in your tool belt. So it's useful, I think, or at least I found it useful to kind of say, well, it would be we're trying to solve a math problem if you had a mathematician in the room. You could maybe get to that answer on your own, but wouldn't it be faster if you worked with someone who already had that expertise? And so I think treating it like a collaborative product and saying, yes, you could do these things on your own. You could probably fix, do an oil change on your own, but wouldn't it be faster if you had a mechanic and aren't you just trying to drive the car? So does it really matter if you do it or they do it? So I think my experience has just been that treat it like a collaborator, treat it like another member of the team, treat it like, it's almost like in a university course where you're forced to do a group project, but it is helpful if you have someone that's a business major and someone that's a marketing major and someone that's an English major and someone that's doing something else. That's useful to have everyone there because then inevitably you're going to ask the English major to write the final report, and you're going to ask the business major to do all the numbers. And like, if you can do that, then you're going to have a better outcome. And you're also going to not have to do the stuff that you didn't really want to do in the first place, which, is kind of like putting a dog pill in a piece of cheese to be like, look, it's getting you to the thing that you're getting a good thing out of it. Okay. You're kind of trying to pull the wool over their eyes a little bit in the beginning. That's how I've felt about it. But if you can sugarcoat it a little bit, I think it is just that dynamic of this is collaborative. It's not replacing you, which is kind of what you taxes don't want to do off your plate.
Mm-hmm. And actually, I'm really interested to understand like your point of view because I think I reflect on something recently, which is my over reliance on AI. So like I realize that sometimes now, whenever I'm posed with kind of a more tricky question, I'm like, I'm just going to ask AI, and I realize that it's a really bad habit that I've started developing. And so my question to you is do you think there is such a thing as over reliance on AI, and like what would you say are some examples if it is?
Yeah, I mean, I think that example even that I gave of hiring for a role and then having an assessment and being like, cool, you used AI for the assessment and I can tell is an example because that's theoretically that was an important conversation to have with us, right? Like we were hiring you, that should have been an important moment for you. This is a job that you want and you used automation to do it. I want to see you using automation. I want you to be open to that, but what I don't want you to do is 100% rely on it. And so I think that's kind of the potential pitfall you're using as a replacement and not as just a support system. And then in the creative and content side of things, excessive AI can result in homogenized work. It lacks originality because, AI is generating variations of existing ideas over and over again, but isn't necessarily coming up with new ideas itself. So I think it can dull creativity in that way. And also dull critical thought. If it's doing all of the problem solving for you, then how often are you really engaging in critical thinking?
Yeah.
100%. This is the thing. Is like I feel like our critical thinking abilities are really going to deteriorate over the next few years because anything challenging, we're just going to offload and try to get an easy answer. It's like it's like a diet pill. You're trying to like solve a problem, but really you should be doing the work. You should be taking the pill.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's a shortcut in a lot of ways. Yeah.
my input, not that you asked for it, Joe, but I think the over reliance question is like if you can tell it's AI, like in your example, Shannon, like that's a problem because we can all AI is it's too down the middle road. Here's half your answer. Here's the counterpoint, and we don't that's not very interesting for us humans to read. We just want to know the unfiltered raw truth that someone is thinking. Um, I guess the last question of mine, and one that I kind of maybe, as you can probably tell, I'm very bullish in AI and very much an optimist. But the one thing that I do worry about is kind of what impact it's going to have on junior roles. So I think of my little brother who's 17 and going into a workforce soon where many roles are going to be automated, like that kind of base level junior role that people were doing when I was his age. That's going to be AI. I think in a few years, by the time, in 3 years' time when he's done with university, I think we're definitely going to see that. You're not going to what you're going to have an AI doing the basic sales calls and the basic email outreach and the blogs and the product listings, like basically all of the kind of mundane stuff is going to be AI, and I think there'll be humans who I think will be highly motivated and enhanced and augmented in their creativity on top of that. But the actual kind of people coming into the workforce, I think that's where the problem will be. So I don't know. What are your thoughts, Shannon?
I think a lot of the responsibility should come back to the hiring leaders, to be honest. I think that the recruitment process should change and needs to change because there's a lot of things that are going to be able to easily be carried out by AI. So I think that kind of goes back to that conversation of skill-based versus role-based recruitment, which is of course challenging if you're just entering the workforce. But I think of, it's almost like when you were applying for universities and you wanted to have a more, robust application, say like, oh, I did this after school thing and I played soccer and I volunteered and all this stuff. I think that looking at that as a hiring team is going to become more important. I think you need to be diligent about what you're including in your job description and your job requirements so that you're not accidentally filtering out really interesting and useful and applicable experience. Um, one of the people I used to work with at my last company was so phenomenal at her job, and it was the first time she had had that role ever. She had a role in a completely unrelated field before, but when you broke down the role, she was a teacher before. And when you broke down the things that were required of her to be a teacher, it was hyper organization and really good at managing different personalities and, really wonderful at addressing different needs of different stakeholders at different times for different reasons. And that translated beautifully into her job as an event manager. And she was incredible at it. But if we had gone through, what is now a recruitment process that has a ton of automation involved in it, she probably would have gotten filtered out before even like a person ever even saw it. And so I think as a hiring manager, as a hiring leader, we need to be more mindful of the fact that what was looked for as a necessity of a role before is probably not the same thing that's necessary out of a role now. And I think it requires more human intervention to look at experience and see what aspects of that experience are going to be relevant to the role, rather than just looking for, the standard title or the standard degree or whatever it is, because it's just different now. I think the what you can do is different than, the title of what you did.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think we are closing out, but we talked a lot about AI, but I really want to understand a little bit about your journey. How did you end up in Carbon 6? How did you become so awesome at your job? And just tell us a little bit about, yeah, what brought you to this place you are right now.
Yeah, so I've always kind of been involved in e-commerce because I started my career at Hasbro Toys. And so I was doing all of the listing copy for all of the toys under Boys licensed, which is what we called them. But it was basically Marvel, Star Wars, Power Rangers, Jurassic Park, basically like all the nerdy boy stuff. Yeah. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. So I did all of the Amazon listings for that when I was there. And then I briefly worked for a content marketing agency. And that's where I got really into the content side of things and content strategy. And when I was at that organization, I created a role for creative strategy on the pre-sales team because I realized that the sales team was often, I know this never happens, but the sales team was over promising things that were being under delivered on the creative side, and then we were losing clients. And so it created this creative strategy role, which is where I got really into the idea of like, how can I create a creative ecosystem and be really efficient with the content rather than just creating a high volume of content that maybe isn't going to resonate. And then this was all kind of during COVID, so careers, job paths were all up and down. I managed a hotel for a year in the middle of COVID because I had nothing else going on. On my LinkedIn, you'll see that it says former tortoise manager. That was because I was responsible for 38 red-footed tortoises for a year. That was cool. And then I ended up at Thrasio. So I was at Thrasio for about a year and a half, and kind of went through the ups of it being a unicorn and the downs of it not making it on the arc. So that was an experience, and then ended up at Carbon6 after that because I felt like there were a lot of things about the aggregator model that were exciting to me about, being responsible for building a brand and optimizing a brand. But I felt like Carbon6's model was more sustainable in that it was in software. But what I loved about Carbon6 early on, especially, was that we had so many different tools. So it was like working at an agency too, because it was, our inventory tool, our reimbursement tool, our ads tool, and I was trying to find a way to make all those things cohese. So sort of my whole career path has been around this idea of creative strategy, content strategy, efficient strategy, and then through lines of all of that have been managing teams. And so that's where this conversation in part comes from, is that I have always enjoyed managing teams. Building teams is something I really get excited about. And I think it's really important, especially in creative and content, to be thinking about the ways that AI and automation are changing the dynamics of creative and content teams in particular, and how we can attend to that to make sure that those teams still feel valued. And then now I'm on my own. Now I'm looking for my next thing. Just kind of looking for something to get excited about. Again, on my LinkedIn, I posted about looking for a new star to hitch my wagon to. So that's where I'm at this moment. Just looking for the next thing.
Awesome.
Nice. One final question from me. Yeah, we've been talking a lot about AI, but in terms of human culture, and when we went for breakfast, Shannon, in London, this was what I was fascinated about with Carbon6, because from the outside, when you would meet the Carbon6 employees, they all were super motivated. They were always, friendly, smiley, really happy. It looked like they just have a fantastic culture. And I'm not going to name names of some of the other places you mentioned, but certainly kind of I've met people from some of the other companies, and I haven't felt that. So, what do you think in terms of the culture that Carbon6 got really right for its human employees, and then maybe also, if you're open to answering it, some of those other places, what do you think went wrong in the culture?
I think so. Carbon6, like many companies, has core leadership values, but I think one of the things that really set Carbon6 apart is that they adhere to them. The one that resonated, I think, the most with our team, and probably resonated a lot company wide, was we all own Carbon6, which sounds like a little corny and a little surface level, but it was really true, is that everyone felt like they owned Carbon6, and there was a sense of ownership around it. And when you own something and you feel responsible for it, I think you're more passionate about it. Some of the other principles were, we care more about getting it right than being right. So there was a lot of, in our DNA was like, let's just do the thing that we need to do and not get so obsessed about who's right and who's wrong, and kind of keep ego out of it. Comfortable with discomfort. I'm like, I should remember all of them because I wrote them, but I don't remember all of them. But the short answer is, like, the leadership principles that we had actually were true to the DNA of the company. And I think the other thing is, a lot of organizations say that they're horizontal structures, that, everyone's voice matters, and it doesn't matter if you're brand new or you've been there for 3 years. A lot of companies say that. I've been at a lot of companies that say that. Carbon6 is the only company I've been at where that really felt true all the time, where it felt like if you had an idea, it didn't matter if you were coming from engineering, it didn't matter if you were coming from product, it didn't matter where you were coming from. If it was a good idea, we were going to listen to it. And I think that really built a lot of confidence in people, that made them feel confident about themselves, made them feel confident about their role in the organization, and ultimately made them feel confident about what Carbon6 was trying to do. And I think that was truly unique. And it's something that, I would feel lucky to see replicated in another company that I join.
Amazing.
Well, do you want people to reach out to you? If so, how should they reach out?
Yeah,
And
connect
what
with me
should
on
they
my
reach out to
LinkedIn.
you about?
Yeah, connect on my LinkedIn. Feel free to send me a DM. I have a mildly outdated portfolio link if you want to check out some of the work I used to do for Hasbro. But definitely be in touch. I'm a huge nerd about content and creative strategy and team building. So always happy to have a conversation.
Awesome.
Well, thanks so much, Hannah. It's been great to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Really
Thank you for bearing with my technical